Okay, today we are going to talk about recovering from invalidation, and this is going to go with Interpersonal Effectiveness Handout number 19. Recovering from invalidation can be just as important as validating others. There are several types of invalidation, and actually, some can be helpful and some can be harmful or painful. Um, When your opinions, beliefs, or behaviors are invalidated and they're in fact based on false or accurate information, then invalidation can actually be helpful. When done with respect, these interactions are usually not distressing and they may even be sought out by somebody. So, for example, giving and receiving corrective feedback on something or engaging in debates about opinions can be critical to intellectual stimulation and personal growth. Um, Important here, I think, is where we talk about done with respect and effective communication skills. Um, Reflecting on how we improve is not always easy, especially when we are distressed, but if we can do it in that respectful way, it can be helpful. And I think to notice that when we say helpful and painful brings us back to those dialectics, right? So two things may be true at the same time. It may be helpful and it may be painful. So let's talk a little bit more about the ways it might be helpful for you. So it can be helpful if it corrects important mistakes. Maybe your facts are wrong, or we'll call this corrective feedback. Corrective feedback can be information that clearly shows that your facts are wrong, or your beliefs don't make logical sense in terms of the facts, or maybe your behavior is not effective for reaching your goals. When the feedback that is given to you is correct and it's given in like a non-judgmental, respectful manner that's open to discussion and to your point of view, you may agree, you might change your mind, feel fine, and go forward. So it can be a very productive conversation. It can also be helpful when it stimulates intellectual and personal growth by listening to others' views. So some people might call this like an opinion debate. So this can occur when a person disagrees with your opinions or beliefs. We can probably think of lots of different topics that this could happen in, but some of them are like political points of view, religious beliefs, philosophical positions, moral value positions, parenting positions, really any belief or position that another person could reasonably disagree with you. They may strongly argue against your point of view. And whether you feel invalidated or not usually depends on whether the other person treats your views with respect, right? And listens to you even when disagreeing. So if they're shouting, name calling, insulting, things like that, that can be very invalidating and not a productive conversation. But it can actually be pretty easy to feel fine after a hearty but respectful discussion or debate and continue on your way. So it can be helpful, but it can also be painful. There's It can be exceptionally distressing when your point of view is disregarded while the other person's validity is questioned. So how distressing it might be can depend on the importance of the person that's invalidating you. Is it someone that you really care for, love, respect, look up to? And also your own position to your self-respect and your ability to kind of trust yourself and what you're saying or doing. There are many levels of ways invalidation can be painful or harmful. Um, so we're just going to go through a few examples of those. So one of them is we've all probably can relate to this when you feel like you're being ignored. So other people aren't paying attention to what you do or have to say, even when you're doing or want to even when what you're doing or want to say is actually valid and relevant. So you're being treated like you're unimportant or kind of like an irrelevant person. This can be really harmful if it's like a very persistent and long-lasting pattern of this, because that can make you start feeling unimportant and irrelevant, right? If someone just continuously kind of doesn't pay attention to what you're doing or saying. It can be painful when you're repeatedly being misunderstood. So that's when like others just don't understand what you have to say, like what you're thinking or how you feel, even when you keep trying to tell them, right? So it can be so frustrating. What you say about yourself or your experience simply just isn't getting through to the other person. We can all probably think to a time when we're like, why aren't you getting this? It may be that the person is being insensitive. Maybe they're unable to get where you're coming from, or they have their own opinions about you, kind of no matter what you say or do. This can be tough though, because it might make you start to question your ability to communicate, right? If you're doing it really effective and you're just still not getting it, um, you might start to even worry about like, is what they're saying right about me, and am I wrong? It can be really painful when you're being misread, right? So um, they might not only misread you, but they could be insensitive to what is going on with you unless you're just like spelling it out to them in that really clear kind of like ABC language. So the problem is that in these cases, it's easy to feel as if you and your responses must be very different from others. Like you might start to believe that the other persons are sensitive to you, but like just don't actually care about you. So this could be make you think like you're inadequate or that something's wrong with you, right? Because they just aren't getting what's going on with you. It can be painful when you're being misinterpreted, right? So they might give an understandable but incorrect cause for your behavior and your experiences. So you're really trying to explain like how you feel or why you did what you did, and the other person's like, no, you don't feel that way. Or they may misinterpret with great certainty your intent for doing or saying something. That can be really frustrating and hurtful, right? If someone is saying particularly like you had bad intentions when you really didn't, that can just really be hurtful and pejorative. And it may be based on how your behavior affects them, right? So, well, I feel manipulated, therefore you must have been trying to manipulate me. Um, so your reasons for doing or not doing things are getting misconstrued, often in ways that make you look motivated to be incorrect, ineffective, or otherwise problematic. So it's like a valid reason for your behavior, things like previous learning, biological predispositions, they're just getting ignored in this instance. So it's assuming like if you wanted to be different, you would be different. And so it can make it really hard to feel accepted and cared about when people are continuously misinterpreting you. It can be painful when important facts of your life are ignored or denied. So facts that might explain reasonable behavior are discounted. Maybe they're just rendered that they're not that important or that they're distorted. So for example, like if you're late because of traffic and your friend responds, oh, you're always late, don't give me that excuse, right? Well, that hurts because you really were late because of traffic. Like that's just a valid reason you couldn't do that. So when the current facts are ignored or denied, it can make you have serious consequences or just feel really kind of bad. It can be painful when you're receiving unequal treatment. So others might treat you as very different from them, kind of in essential ways, even when you're not so different. So that might be doing things that are treating you like you're inferior, you're a child, you're too fragile, but you really just don't understand the other person. Um, that can make you feel like you're not part of the group or like you're not good enough, you're not smart enough, lots of different ways. It's really painful when you're being disbelieved, even when you're being truthful, right? So, again, kind of like we've been talking about, you're presenting the facts and they're just not believing you. And that can have consequences. Um, it's it's as if you were doing it on purpose or for some other reason when you are just telling the truth. It can be really painful when your private experiences are trivialized or even just denied, right? So maybe you're really stressed and you're going through your head your day, you're just kind of stuck in your mind, right? Because it's just been kind of a hard day. And you might seem disengaged, and someone might say, oh, you just seem so off today, or you just seem so disengaged. That can be really invalidating to your personal experience. And it might be helpful to know how you're coming off to people. So that's one of those instances where those dialectics might come into play, right? So, with that being said, it is possible to recover from harmful or painful invalidation, and there are lots of different ways you can do it. We'll just discuss a few of the ways. So, you can check the facts, right? Let's rely on some of our old skills. So, check all the facts and try to do it in a non defensive way, just an objective way. It can be helpful sometimes to check them with another person that you can trust to validate the valid, right? So, someone that you feel like can bring kind of a non judgmental perspective to the situation. And this can be a critical step after invalidation so that you don't re-experience that invalidation. You can acknowledge and work to change your invalid responses. So if your responses were incorrect or maybe they were just ineffective, Just admitting it and trying to change what you're thinking, saying, or doing. Also, stop blaming people can really be helpful in this situation. And so that goes along with the next one. So work to change those invalid thinking, comments, or actions, right? Get on a more corrective course so that you are more effective in what you're trying to accomplish in that situation. Drop judgmental self statements. This can be a hard one for people, right? So even if you did make a mistake or you believed something that wasn't correct, it doesn't mean you're stupid or even to blame for not knowing the facts. There are often many valid reasons for invalid behavior. So not trying not to assign judgment or labels to yourself because maybe you weren't correct or you made a mistake. Reminding yourself that behavior is caused, right? So um, all behaviors caused, and that is true of your responses also. So remember that you are and have always been doing the best you could given the circumstances and your personal history. So whether that's previous learning or like a biological predisposition for it. Um, be compassionate towards yourself. This one's tough too for a lot of people. So you might keep a stiff like upper lip while you're around the person invalidating you, but on your own, there's every reason to be compassionate and self-soothing because it does hurt to be invalidated, right? You can use other skills that maybe you've learned in the past for self-soothing when you are invalidated, and be compassionate and give yourself kind of the grace and space to self-soothe. Admit that it hurts to be invalidated by others, right? Um, Even if they are right, it's okay to just say, yeah, that hurts, that was painful, and that's okay to feel that way. Acknowledge your valid reaction. So if your responses were valid under the circumstances, acknowledge that you were correct or that your responses are reasonable and normal given what the situation was. Self validation can take a lot of work and a lot of verbal processing with others, but it can be really worth that effort. Remind yourself that invalidation is rarely a catastrophe, even when you are right. So keep in mind that those invalid responses, either someone else's or your own, are generally not the end of the world, right? So it doesn't have to be an all or nothing reaction. How can I use that self soothing to help myself walk the middle path or live in my wise mind? Describe your experiences and actions in a supportive environment. um, it can be very vital to do that, to let go of that invalidation. It can be similar to like an exposure type therapy if you've ever had like really bad anxiety about something or trauma. Through that experience where shame isn't being reinforced and personal invalidity isn't evoked when you're describing it, you can gradually learn that your responses are understandable and valid in important ways. um, it's painful to be invalidated, and we can honor that pain as a way to validate ourselves. So, taking that dialectical stance there would allow us to hold space for both our pain while we stay in our wise mind. Grieve traumatic invalidation and the harm it created, right? So, that goes along with that again, is just giving ourselves the space to be with our pain and self soothe while using that wise mind. Practice radical acceptance of the invalidating person, but really of yourself too. So it requires acknowledgement that being invalidated by others hurts, like we've been talking about. um, Engaging in compassion and self-soothing of yourself. But it's also going to be easier if you can extend that to the person who invalidated you, right? Um, so maybe you go back to some of those old skills, like imagine the invalidating person with a half smile or willing hands can be really helpful to kind of move on and let go of this pain. And then the last one, which I find really helpful myself, is validate yourself exactly the way you would validate somebody else, right? So it's often easier for us to kind of be easier or give more grace and compassion and validation to others than we do to ourselves. So really getting in the habit of kind of practicing what we preach to others can be really helpful. That is all I have for you all right now, but I look forward to discussing this in person during group.